Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the July meeting of the MTA Board before we take our month recess for summer vacation. Before we get started with the public speaking, I'd like to introduce one brand new board member and another returning new board member. The new board member is Peter Ward, Governor appointee, and the returning board member is Andrew Saul, representing Westchester County. So, welcome aboard. Let's begin with the public speakers. Mr. Morello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 5 public speakers signed up today. In keeping with the statute that guides our board procedures, we would ask the speakers to confine their comments to topics that are on the board's agenda for today. The first speaker is Murray Bowden. He will be followed by Omar Vera. Mr. Bowden.
I guess I've been coming to these meetings about 20 years and speaking, saying a lot of things. Today was a world-changing meeting. I was at the Safety Committee meeting this morning. They had a discussion about railroad crossings that needed to be discussed and had never been discussed in the way they did this morning. It's going to change things. It's going to save lives. It's going to save money. It's going to change a lot of things. I've been working on that project for many years. I've been in Washington and discussed it with the people who write the laws that you're following. What they discussed this morning was phenomenally correct. And Tom, you said something that was very important, and I'd like to use it again if I might. You talked about the randomness of pedestrians and the fact that they're not paying attention. It's exactly the way to say it. Randomness. People walking around not paying attention anymore. That's change, has to change. And the Safety Committee made it clear that they're about to deal with the fact that they have to do things differently because pedestrians and drivers aren't paying attention the way they used to. And so the rules have to be simpler, and Mitch described it really well, that what's happening out on Long Island is not happening out in the Midwest. I'm going from this meeting to the New Jersey Transit meeting. I have a board meeting this afternoon, and I'm going to tell them how creatively you've gone forward to solve the problems that need to be solved. I also want to thank the Bridge and Tunnel Committee for their team that meets with me and others, moving things forward, in reality recognizing that the world has changed and they're moving forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Omar Vera, will be followed by Mr. X.
Good morning, MTA Board. First, let me congratulate the entire MTA for finally picking the L train shutdown option, full shutdown. And it was great that we finally got to speak with each other, Mr. Chairman, and in Bushwick, Brooklyn. All right. Second, I would like to also mention that at least with the M5 and M55 option, I understand why the M6 couldn't be brought back, because this is a brand new route, but at least there's some improvements in the overlays of this route. And I'm glad that now that at least the M55, the proposed, will now be serving 44th Street and 6th Avenue. This is an improvement from the original plan, but we can all at least improve by implementing select bus service one day. Rather, all crosstown routes in Manhattan should get that. All right. I'm also a little bit more concerned about the progress of 2nd Avenue subway, because last night I read an article from Ben Kabak's blog, 2nd Avenue Saga, on the delays in the elevator testings, the installations, and the safety systems, and it's so complicated. We all remember what happened with the 7 lines extension to Hudson Yards. That was delayed by over 20 months due to somewhat, unfortunately, poor planning. And I just hope that, because this is a project planned since the 1920s, 2nd Avenue, and as a result of this plan, I just hope that the W train won't get delayed in returning, because I miss the subway line that was eliminated when I graduated from high school. So its return was personal to me. But thank you all. And as for that, anything else, it was actually on the, everything's good. Thank you all for having me here. I yield back the balance of my time, and have a good August recess. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Vera. Mr. X? Mr. X will be followed by Arthur Piccolo.
Again, I'm disturbed about Tom. I'm disturbed about how he treated Fernando and Veronica at the previous board meeting. That was inexcusable. They asked him a simple question, a straight question, yet he couldn't get a straight answer, which is why he shouldn't be here. There are other reasons why I'm disgusted with his erratic behavior, his off-the-wall mood swings, and his sloppy no-care attitude. Regarding the budget, there's several items that were excluded from it, such as the trap bed that runs between the Brooklyn Aquarium and Ocean Parkway, which has been closed since 1954. The same year the F-train was extended below Church Avenue. Why it was excluded from the budget remains a mystery. There are other projects that should have been included in the budget, but unfortunately I can't submit it right. I'll submit it at a later date. Okay, and there's also another reason why I'm disgusted with Tom. It's been 4 years since the MTA Police Department ambushed me and deactivated my reduced fare Metro card downstairs, and the lead attacker is in his room. Why he's in his room remains a mystery, because I submitted some information about him to Tommy P. and his predecessor, and both men ignored me. If you can't share my concerns, you shouldn't be here. It's that simple. So just one thing. In addition to Tommy P., who was the Thomasina, the person, the actual party who deactivated my reduced fare Metro card, should also stay home and be a housewife. Just wear apron and dress, because you're both not big enough, thin enough to wear a mini skirt.
Well, thank you, Mr. X. Arthur Piccolo will be
Ladies and
followed.
gentlemen, excuse me.
You'll be followed by Jason Pinheiro.
Ladies and gentlemen, an inherent part of any calendar and your responsibilities is the condition of the New York City subways. If you were to take a survey, any survey of New Yorkers, what is the most intolerable, disappointing aspect of summer in New York? It is the unbearable heat on New York City subway platforms. It's a problem that should not exist, has no reason to exist. I left you with an article from the New York Times of August 11, 1910. Electric fans for all subway cars. Ventilation much better, air stirred up, cars comfortable. 110 years ago, we solved the problem of intolerable subway cars by putting in ceiling fans until air conditioning arrived in the 1960s. Yet to this day, in 99% of the 300 below-ground subway stations, there is no such ventilation system. If you do go to the Wall Street station of the IRT, you will find 12 industrial commercial fans operating when there should be 24. It can solve the problem, fans. I use the Grand Army Plaza subway station every day. At 6 o'clock this morning, when it was tolerable on street level, it felt like at least 100 degrees down there. There's no need for it. I've costed out that at $500 a fan, $500 per installation time for staff, that for a total cost of $10 million, by next summer, in all 300 subway stations, you could have 24 or more commercial quality ceiling fans that would incredibly increase the comfort level in all of those stations. That the chairman could make one of the most important announcements he has ever made at next May's meeting, with, I'm sure, incredible amount of media here, that after over more than 100 years of the New York City subways, that in the summer of 2017, it will finally be comfortable in New York City subway platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Piccolo. Our final speaker is Jason Pinheiro.
Good morning, President Prendergast. Good morning, Chairman Ferrer, and good morning to all MTA board members. Two topics that I want to discuss this morning. The first one is regarding the M5. It is a dumb idea that on Monday, you guys voted in favor of splitting it in two instead of doing an enhanced study regarding SBS on the M5, because it is not fair having only one SBS route that goes uptown to downtown, that's the M15, and all the rest going crosstown. I don't think it's fair. And my second topic of the day is regarding Second Avenue Subway. It is about time that the MTA acknowledge that Second Avenue Subway won't be completed in December. I noticed this in June, and Second Avenue Sagas reported the other night, and finally somebody had to agree with me that Second Avenue Subway is not going to be open in December. Dr. H, I'm sorry to say this, but Second Avenue Subway is not going to be open in December. I'm betting first quarter 2017 on the safe side. So I hope that in September we get better answers than this, and I'll yield my time.
Thank you very much. That concludes the public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Morello. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our July board meeting. Towards the end of the meeting today, Bob Ferran, our Chief Financial Officer, will give a presentation on our next financial plan, as he does every July. As many of you know, our custom every year is to issue in July an update on our finances, a financial plan, and a preliminary budget, and to revisit for the board vote in December. I'll leave most of the details to Bob, but I want to highlight a few things that stood out in what I saw in a preview of that presentation. First, every financial discussion we'll have for the next few years will begin with the passage of the single largest investment ever in MTA infrastructure. A $29.5 billion 2015 through 19 capital program sets the stage for 5 years' worth of vital investments to renew, enhance, and expand our network. If you're looking for developments that benefit the overall utility and reliability of the region's public network, that's hard to beat. But there's another important storyline in the MTA's budget, namely the continued, most aggressive cost-cutting in its history, which began in 2010 and continues just as aggressively to this day. We feel it a moral obligation to be able to trim costs out of our organization as we're asking people to pay for their fares and experience our services. Company-wide and individual agency initiatives have generated tremendous savings for the organization and major benefits to our customers. We will meet or exceed our 2016 target of some $1.6 billion in annually recurring savings. With the projected savings targets included in this plan, we expect to get that aggregate amount of annually recurring savings to almost $2 billion in 2020. That's $2 billion of annual costs out of the organization as compared to when we started this effort back in 2010. These efforts allow us to accomplish 4 important goals: minimize the pressure on fare and toll increases, continue and invest in our #1 job, providing safe and reliable service to the 8.7 million people who rely on us each and every single day, invest in new service and service support to meet customer demand, and fund and support investments in technology and stations to improve and enhance the customer's experience. The minutes of June's meeting have been distributed to all members, and you had a chance to review them. May I have a motion on those minutes? Second, any comments, questions, or revisions to those minutes? All in favor? Aye. The Committee on Finance was chaired this month by Mr. Ferrer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There is one action item on the agenda for board approval. The action item to be considered and recommended is the approval of modifications of various agreements between the MTA and each of its commuter railroads and the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, known as Amtrak, necessary to comply with the requirement of the Federal Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act of 2008 and the implementing policies adopted by the Northeast Corridor Commission. The committee recommends this action, and I move it.
Second. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
There are 5 procurement actions this month in a total amount of $67.2 million. There are no non-competitive procurements. There are 5 competitive procurements in the total amount of $67.2 million described in the board book on pages 38 through 46. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second, any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
There are no ratifications. There are 4 real estate action items which are described on pages 47 through 55 of the board book distributed for this meeting. The committee recommends these items, and I move them.
Second, any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
That concludes the Finance Committee report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Ferrer, if you would continue as you chaired the Transit Authority Committee.
Transit and Bus Committee committee met on Monday as well and reports the following. There is one action item this month for board approval described on pages 56 through 61 of the board book. The action item approves the proposal to split the N5 route into 2 routes. The committee recommends this action item, and I move it.
Second, any comments or questions on this item? All in favor?
Aye. There are 19 procurement actions this month in the total amount of $96.7 million. There are 2 non-competitive procurements totaling $11.4 million for New York City Transit described on pages 66 through 68 of the board book. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second, any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye. There are 11 competitive procurements totaling $61.4 million for New York City Transit described on pages 69 through 78 of the board book. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second, any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye. There are 6 ratifications described on pages 79 through 86 of the board book. 1 for New York City Transit for $1.3 million, and 5 for MTA Capital Construction for $22.6 million. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them.
Second, any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye. And that concludes the Transit and Bus Committee report.
The Metro North Committee was chaired by Susan Metzger.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The Metro North Railroad Committee met this month and reports the following. There is one action item this month for board approval. This action item was presented at committee as a walk-in item and is found on page 87 of the board book. The action item authorizes Metro North and MTA staff to participate in one or more public hearings conducted by the Connecticut Department of Transportation with regard to a proposed increase in New Haven line fares for travel between New York and Connecticut stations. The committee recommends this action item, and I move it.
Any comments or questions? Mr. Elbert?
I think this also applies to travel wholly within the state of Connecticut, does it not? Not just New York to Connecticut.
Between Connecticut stations, yes.
Okay.
Any further comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
There are 15 procurement items in the total amount of $40.5 million. There are 5 non-competitive procurements in the amount of $24 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second, any comments or questions on these procurements? All in Mr. Merbler?
To abstain from items 3 and 5.
So noted. All in favor?
Aye. There are 7 competitive procurements in the total amount of $4.5 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second, any comments or questions? All in favor?
There are 3 ratifications in the total amount of $11.8 million. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them.
Second, any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
This concludes the Metro North report. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pally chaired the Long Island Committee report, Long Island Committee meeting.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The Long Island Railroad Committee met this month, and I report the following. There are 8 procurement items in the amount of $7 million. There is 1 non-competitive procurement for Long Island Railroad for $109,000. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Second. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye. There are 5 competitive procurements, 3 for Long Island Railroad in the total amount of $1.5 million, and 2 for MTA Capital Construction in the total amount of $1.7 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye. There are 2 ratifications for MTA Capital Construction in the amount of $3.8 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second. Any comments or questions on these? All in favor?
Aye. And this concludes the report of the Long Island Railroad Committee.
Since you chaired the Bridge and Tunnels
Yep.
Committee, sir, would you please provide that
Absolutely.
report?
Bridges and Tunnels met this month and reports the following. There are 4 procurements this month in a total amount of $20.12 million. There are no non-competitive procurements. There are 4 competitive procurements in the total amount of $20.12 million. The committee members who were present at the committee meeting considered and voted in favor of the procurement items, although a committee quorum was not present for the vote. I move the board approve these procurement items.
Second. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
There are no ratifications, and this concludes the Bridges and Tunnels Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Pally. We'll now turn the floor over to Bob Ferran, our Chief Financial Officer, who will give a joint presentation to both the Board and the Finance Committee. I would ask that you let Bob finish his presentation, and we'll be glad to entertain any questions you may have regarding the financial report. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The July Financial Plan 2017 to 2020 includes both the 2016 mid-year forecast, the 2017 preliminary budget, and a financial forecast for the years 2017 through 2020. Before we get started, let me just make a general comment. We maintain our books and records according to generally approved, accepted accounting principles, GAAP. But by statute, we're required to balance our books on a self-sustaining basis, which basically means we can use a cash balance from one year to offset expenses in the next year. And on this first chart, you can see what we were projecting last February. We were projecting that we would end this year, 2016, with a $121 million cash balance. That then would roll over into 2017, where we have a deficit, and offset that deficit to leave us with basically a break-even of about $3 million in 2017. Revenues and expenses were in balance, projected to be in balance for 2018, leaving us again with effectively a $3 million or break-even balance. But in 2019, we were projecting a deficit of $257 million. Now, the February plan was based on the same three key interrelated elements that have been in every financial plan that we present to you. Again, it's a consistent plan each time so that it's easier to follow and see what has changed. But the 3 key elements, first, biennial fare and toll increases of 4% are projected in 2017 and 2019, so effectively 2% a year. And I do want to emphasize they're projected for financial plan purposes. As you know, before we put in place a fare and toll increase, it has to be studied by staff, recommendations made to the board on how it would be structured. They are then advertised. There's public hearings that go forth, and then the board will deliberate, and the board will approve or reject or amend such fare and toll increases. So these are projected biennially. We also have increased annually recurring savings targets each year. As the chairman mentioned, we expect to exceed the savings targets of $1.6 billion for this year, 2016, but we were projecting $1.8 billion by 2019. The February plan also included increased funding for our capital program. We were setting aside $125 million a year for pay-as-you-go capital. We had a one-time contribution of $75 million, which in total increased our funding for the capital program by $2.4 billion. The plan also included additional investments in service quality, and service support of $278 million through 2019, maintenance and operations expenditures of $434 million, information technology of $184 million through 2019, and expenditures for enterprise asset management, $157 million. We set aside every year 1% of our operating expenses as a general reserve to help handle unexpected shortfalls in revenue, unexpected increases in expenses, or unusual things that might happen. This reserve that we set aside helped us to avoid having to borrow when Tropical Storm Sandy came through and hit us. In the financial plan in February, we were taking one half of that reserve, $140 million or $70 million, and applying that to reduce the Long Island Railroad's additional pension plan. It's our lowest funded plan. It's a closed plan, but we've been putting money aside for that plan. Now, what's changed since the February plan? Well, first, as the chairman mentioned, we have an approved capital program for 2015 to 2019. That's a significant change affecting our finances. But we've had changes in re-estimates that are favorable. We have better than forecasted 2015 results of $185 million. Over the plan period through 2020, we're expecting debt service to be $800 million less than what was forecast. And that comes from a variety of reasons. First, the fact that the capital program was approved a year and a half after the beginning of 2015 had a positive side in that we weren't selling debt for the program, so we've delayed the issuance of debt. Debt service didn't occur. It's merely a timing issue because we're going to sell as much debt as we had originally planned, but within this 4-year financial period, our debt service is lower. The transaction that we expect to sell mid-August for the Hudson Yards, lease securitization, was unexpected in February, and we expect to save about $152 million through that transaction. We've been doing a number of refundings to take advantage of lower interest rates. That saved us about $133 million during this plan period, and our forecast of interest rates has dropped between February and the July plan, and that's a benefit of about $98 million. We're forecasting lower energy expenditures, primarily for fuel. That's $300 million, higher toll revenues of $166 million, and higher other operating revenues of $123. Now, we've had a number of changes or re-estimates that have negatively affected the plan. We're projecting higher health and welfare and fringe benefit expenses, primarily for workers' compensation of $430 million. The city's actuary has come out and revised their mortality expectations, the life expectancy for the retirees participating in NYSER's plan. That adds about $100 million a year to our pension expenses. We have lower fare box revenues of about $182 million during this period, and that primarily reflects perhaps that we were too optimistic in our forecast in February. In total, these and other re-estimates and changes provide $690 million more of resources through 2019 between July and February. Let's highlight the 2017 to 2019 July plan. First, we continue to project fare and toll increases to be held at 4% in 2017 and 2019. Again, approximately 2% a year. In February, when we raised our savings targets, we didn't know what initiatives we would have in place to achieve those savings targets. But between February and July, we've identified specific initiatives and either have implemented them or will be implementing those initiatives that will achieve 73% of the $535 million of unidentified targets. We also are increasing our savings targets again. $50 million higher in 2017, $100 million in 18, $150 in 19, and $200 million more by 2020. We will be approaching $2 billion worth of annually recurring savings reductions, by 2020. Now, as you know, we have a policy that we've been pursuing which says that when we save money on capital, meaning our debt service is reduced, we try to put that money back into the capital program. We now are being able to add $566 million of debt service savings to provide additional funding for project costs not in the currently approved capital program. What might those be? Well, they could be for station accessibility. We have a number of older buses. We could do additional bus procurement. We have $500 million in our capital plan for new starts expenditure from a federal grant. We have to have matching funds for that. The money could be used for that. Again, this would be subject to the board approval and board authorization, but we have continued to add capital dollars through our budget. The better results in 2015 than we had initially forecast means that we can accelerate some of our pay-as-you-go that we expected to fund later in the capital program to this year. The benefit there is it helps us to avoid selling debt now, and will save approximately $12 million a year through the financial plan. Then we have additional investments over this plan period for improved customer experience, $195 million, maintenance and operations, $145 million, service and service support, $78, and safety and security initiatives of $46 million. The bottom line you can see on the next page. Next slide. In 2016, we're going from a projected cash balance of $121 million to $200 million. That cash balance, again, rolls over to offset expenses in 2017, leaving us with a cash balance projected of $28 million. That cash balance rolls forward into 2018, increasing the cash balance to $68 million. That is rolled forward in 19 to address the deficit with other efforts that we do. So basically, instead of a $257 million deficit projected for 2019, we effectively break even with a $7 million operating balance. And then projecting in 2020, a $371 million deficit. Let me just give you some of the highlights of these investments that we've been making. The July plan funds $195 million over the plan period to fund directly or in support of capital program funded projects for improvement to the customer experience. This is operations and maintenance expenditures to help maintain or support capital funded program projects, including installation and maintenance of real-time information display signs and USB ports on 600 existing subway cars and buses. It's additional funds for the maintenance of B division countdown clocks, which we expect to have in place by the end of 2018. The B division is the lettered lines. We have New York City Station Enhancement Program that we are re-envisioning 31 different stations to see if we can improve the experience for our customers. We're providing operating support for other projects. Wi-Fi access in all New York City underground stations by the end of this year, 2016, and MTA buses. As part of a zero emissions initiative pilot, we'll be leasing 10 all-electric buses. We plan on launching an intensive 2-week cleaning blitz for all station tracks throughout the system. And then at Metro North, working with the MTA Police Department, and expansions of our homeless outreach in outlying stations. We're investing an additional $145 million in maintenance and operations over the planned period. You know, these are expenditures that aren't obvious to our customers, and they're certainly not glamorous or sexy, but these are the investments that help us to provide safe and reliable service. And the investments are in fleet overhaul, shop plans, and fleet maintenance, structural and track maintenance, and also in safety. The MTA is investing $78 million in service and service support. In terms of new service, MTA Bus is going to implement SBS on key routes. Long Island Railroad will provide year-round Greenport weekend service to the North Fork and add trains time to connect with Fire Island ferries during the peak summer months. Platform service adjustments, these are things that just automatically happen without having to go through public hearings when service, according to our guidelines that have been established and approved by you, the board, say that additional investments are needed. So we continue to do that, both in New York City, MTA Bus, and Long Island Railroad. And service support, New York City is going to continue to expand its platform controllers efforts. That's efforts that are made to minimize the delays that our customers experience because of various incidents that might happen that can be controlled on a platform by direct intervention by our staff. $46 million going for safety and security initiatives over the plan period. This is to keep pedestrians, our customers, our MTA employees, and our assets safe. Some of the initiatives: don't block the box railroad grade crossing initiatives. As someone described, it may have been the chairman, he said, we're looking to figure out ways to distract people from being distracted as they approach a grade crossing so that we can minimize any unfortunate incident that might occur. It's support for on-bus vehicle cameras, GPS technology, and wireless communications, support and staffing for our help point intercoms, expanding security camera installation and oversight, and other investments. Now, I mentioned that in February we identified a number of savings initiatives. We raised the targets, but we didn't know what those initiatives were going to be to help us to achieve those targets. Well, during the period between February and July, we have identified over $495 million of targets, of initiatives to achieve these targets. If you look on this graph, the yellow hash and the solid yellow, those two bars combined are the unidentified initiatives that we had in February. The yellow hashed are the savings that have now been identified in terms of initiatives that were put in place, 495. It still leaves $257 million of unidentified initiatives, but we are making progress. We are addressing these. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are also increasing the savings target, and that's the solid blue, $50 million, $100, $150, and $200 million a year. So the challenge before us is the combined total of the solid yellow and the solid blue. We have for next year $81 million of initiatives that we have to identify, 168 in the next year, 232, and 276 million ahead. What are some of the initiatives that we put in place? On the right side, you see information technology efficiencies, about $113 million over the plan period. We expect to see 7% savings this coming year, about half in personnel cost and half in other expenditures. In procurement, we've consolidated a portion of our procurement, non-core procurement at headquarters, and we're starting to look at our total expenditures on category basis. Instead of negotiating with individual vendors, we're looking at categories of expenditures, bringing all the vendors in at the same time, and using that purchasing power and that competition to achieve savings. And we think we'll hit about $111 million of savings during the plan period. On paratransit, we're projecting $93 million of additional savings. That basically is coming from reducing the rapid growth of paratransit from what was 18% in the mid-2000s down to 15%. It's now, we've brought that down to 6.5% growth while still fully complying with FTA rules and regulations. Finally, on retiree prescription cost, we have a program in place which is saving significant dollars by providing a type of coverage that is very similar to Medicare Part D. In doing so, we're receiving subsidies from the federal government and also rebates, and that's projected to save $58 million during this period. This next chart shows what we have done over the years. As the chairman said, beginning in 2010, we started our cost reduction program. The target in that year was $400 million. Each line shows what we were projecting from 2012, 13, 14, and 15, each of the plans going out. And as you can see, we have raised the bar each time in each year. And as you can see, we've achieved our savings targets for all of the prior plans. And what we have on the far right side, you see that by 2020, we expect and fully expect to achieve almost $2 billion of annually recurring cost savings. That's dollars that would have been in the budget if we had not taken actions, but have now been reduced and eliminated. So where do we end up? Well, the same chart that we projected before. We're able to fund important plan investments, both in terms of service, customer enhancement, service and service support. We're doing it for maintenance and operation, and we're doing it for safety and security. Significant dollars going in, and yet addressing the 2019 deficit with a manageable budget deficit in 2020. But to get here to this point will require continued fiscal discipline. Now, let me kind of put this in perspective. If we do not achieve the savings targets that we put in front of us, you can see what happens to the financial results. We go, as you can see, in 2019 from not addressing the deficit and having basically a break even to having a $427 million deficit. And the deficit in 2020 as projected, instead of being $371 million, balloons to $703 million. Again, if we don't achieve those savings targets that we've put in front of us. Second important point is if we don't have the biennial fare and toll increases that we've projected. You can see that the projected deficits come earlier and they are bigger. You can see that we have deficits projected in 2017 of $108 million, growing to $429 million, to over $1 billion in 2019, to really an untenable $1.3 billion by 2020. We have to achieve the savings targets, and we need to seriously, pursue biennial fare and toll increases. Now, the challenges going forward, right back what I was saying before, the biennial fare and toll increases need to be, pursued. And let me give you a reason to think about it, or how to contemplate it. Fares and tolls only cover about 50% of our operating expenditures, okay? Only 50%. If you take our total cost, that is debt service and other things, they only cover about 1/3 of our cost. So fares and tolls only cover about 1/3 of our total cost. If all of our costs are growing with inflation, but we're not able to raise fares and tolls, you can see why that prior chart showed increasing deficits, large deficits. If we don't hit the efficiencies and the consolidations and the savings targets, we're going to have the same compounded problem. A challenge ahead of us, we're about to go back in through the next cycle of collective bargaining agreements. Most of our represented workers' contracts will expire by the middle of February, and we'll be back at the bargaining table. We have chronic looming costs that have to be addressed. Workers' compensation. Our liability has almost doubled to $2.4 billion in the last 6 years. At Transit, I think they're doing a very good effort at trying to address that. They're looking to see incident prevention, they're looking at improving case management, and they're working on fraud detection. They are addressing it, but the costs are big and it has to be done. Our claims costs are more than $166 million, $70 million a year and growing. Our health care costs are projected to grow at 6.5% to 7% a year. Looming out there as part of Obamacare is something called the Cadillac tax. This is an excise tax that the employer must pay if the benefits that are provided to the employers exceed a certain value in terms of premium cost. Originally by 2018, now it's been pushed back to 2020. But to the extent that the value of the plan you provide to your employees exceeds that IRS established threshold, the employer has to pay 40% of that excess. The cost to us, we estimate now in 2020 would be $73 million. The cost in 2022 is $131 million, we estimate, and it'll just continue to grow. There's pressure to try to push that out or perhaps repeal it, but right now it is the law, and it's something that we have to address. Open road tolling is the future of the toll industry. Open road tolling basically means you're not going through a gate that stops you and then you pay your toll. Basically, there's gantries over the roadway or gantries over the entrance or exits to, the toll facility. The cars drive through. They are either the Easy Pass is billed, or there's a photo that's taken of the license plate, and then the individual owner of the car receives a bill to have to pay. This is where the industry is going. It's good for our customers. We are committed to pursuing it, but there is a revenue loss risk. We've had a project going on at the Henry Hudson Bridge, where we did all electronic tolling, very similar, but you were still going through the toll booths. There we saw that basically it was revenue neutral. But it's unusual in that, 94% collection on Easy Pass, no commercial traffic, very few, obviously, cash tolls. That's different from some of our larger facilities. We're going to be monitoring this as we put it in place to see what the potential revenue loss might be. And so we'll be monitoring that to protect ourselves, because we do know that the toll revenues support mass transit throughout the region. But it is something that we do have to look at. The increased market share of Uber, Lyft, and other app-based services, livery services, has affected our revenue. We get 50 cents per drop on a medallion cab. So every time a rider gets into a medallion cab, we're going to get 50 cents, no matter what the fare. Livery cabs that are app-based, such as Lyft and Uber, do not pay that 50 cent. They pay a sales tax, and we get 0.3% of that sales tax. But a fare would have to be $133 for the 0.3% that we get to equal the 50 cents that we get on any medallion cab. So to the extent that the market share of the app-based liveries increase to the detriment or at the expense of the medallion cabs, we will lose revenue. We have a large capital program. We expect to sell debt to support the capital program. To the extent that interest rates increase, that will put more pressure on us. We think we have reasonable, conservative estimates of future interest rates, but to the extent that it increases more than we built in, that will be a cost. The general health of the economy is important to us, because the economy affects passenger tolls and passenger revenues for fares. It affects our dedicated taxes and subsidies. It affects our pension returns, which affect our contributions, and it affects energy prices. So the general health of the economy is something to be concerned with. And as you're all well aware, we've had probably one of the largest and longest expansions in our economy. And how long that continues, we don't know. But we are prepared, and we will be looking to take appropriate action if we see a faltering in the economy. And finally, we need to continue to use the discipline that the board has demonstrated thus far of using non-recurring revenues not to support, service on a one-shot basis, but to use it to reduce liabilities such as pensions or OPEBs, or to fund capital so that we can take a one-shot and turn it into recurring savings for our budget. So those are the challenges that we've had in the past. Those are the challenges that we'll continue to face in the future. But we feel confident that we're prepared to do that. That concludes the presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Any comments or questions from the board? Veronica?
Mr. Ferran, given that the capital program was approved 18 months late, is there any concern that any of the initiatives identified in the financial plan, or more broadly in the capital program, will not occur on schedule in the remaining 3.5 years?
We were able to keep a number of projects going because we were using our own funds. Those monies, pay-as-you-go capital that we had set aside, that didn't require us to have to sell debt, because we can only sell debt for the new capital program if it's approved. The plan had assumed that we would have an earlier approval, and so we had assumed that we would be selling debt, but we were able to keep most of the projects going because we had set aside our own monies to fund those projects. So we're moving along on schedule.
And the other thing, I think you know this, is we commit the money inside the 5 years, but it's not all spent in the 5 years. In the process leading to the increased contribution from the city and the increased contribution from the state, they were both very clear that they want to make sure that the money that they have to do extracurricular things to be able to generate the revenue to give us, is that we're effectively spending it. So, but the pressure is on, as it is in any capital program, to get those dollars committed and get them spent. Mr. Albert.
Bob, I understood your rationale behind how high the Uber fare would have to be to make up for the loss, but isn't it fair that Uber and Lyft and other car services at least contribute something as the MTA is keeping the streets clear for their vehicles?
If we could have our way, everyone would pay the 50-cent drop fee. And so, but we can't do that. That would require legislation. But if everyone paid the 50-cent drop fee, we'd be indifferent to which service our customers choose to use or our citizens choose to use.
Is any effort being made to speak to legislators about getting that drop fee or a fee from the non-yellow car services?
We've had dialogue, and we continue to have dialogue, because we're going to have to find ways to be able to fund, and both the city and the state coming up with the 2.5 and the 8.3, 7.3. We've actually got $1 billion from last year, so it's an additional 7.3 from the state. But those funding sources need to be discussed, identified, and voted on. Any other comments?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the formal business, although we do have an executive session item pursuant to Section 105 subset 1E and 105 subset 1D of the New York State Public Officers Law for matters relating to collective bargaining and potential litigation. May I have a motion to go into executive session? Second. All in favor? Aye. And we'll return after the executive session. Thank you. We're now back from executive session, where we dealt with matters related to collective bargaining and litigation. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. You need to sit down.
So the report this week on 2nd Avenue subway wasn't great, and it's looking increasing. There's a significant risk you all aren't going to meet the December deadline. Are you at least willing to say that there's a chance that you won't meet it, that it could be early next year?
No, I'm not going to say that now. We acknowledge the importance of making sure we meet the commitment to complete 2nd Avenue by December 31st. A number of months ago, we went forward with a procurement to actually add money to contracts to expedite work that they had to do. And we've been keeping up with that schedule. So no, I'm not willing to say that at this time.
Hi, Tom. Kind of a two-part question. On Monday, there were some performance figures for the Long Island Railroad for the first half of the year that were pretty good. It showed that on-time performance was the best for a half year in like 3 years, nearly met the OTP goal and all that while carrying 1 million more people. So what's behind the first half of the year doing so well, and what's behind the second half getting off to such an awful start with so many service suspensions in the last few weeks, including this morning?
I'm going to stay at 100,000 feet because I'm not as close to the day-to-day service performance of Long Island Railroad as Pat Nowakowski and his staff are. However, I ran the organization, and I know the complex problems it presents. It's probably, from an operating standpoint, one of the most difficult agencies we have. 7, 8 branches feeding the main line, not a lot of redundancy. And so they spend an awful lot of time and effort in terms of what efforts they can take to improve on-time performance. I think the numbers speak for itself in the first half of the year. We've had a number of things happen to it in terms of storms. Today, last night's incident, in terms of somebody turning onto the right-of-way with a car getting trapped, car going on fire. We have to be able to manage those incidents as best we can, even though certain elements of them are beyond our control. The old adage, you're only as good as your last storm or your rush hour, is something that's first in everyone's mind that runs these agencies. So I don't want to stand up here and make complaints or excuses for problems that have occurred recently, because people remember those problems. And Pat and his team are doing everything they can to try to mitigate those impacts. That's the best way for me to answer the question, to be honest with you. And that's somebody who's run the organization and spent 5 years out there.
Hi, Tom. A common thread through the capital plan and the new budget, preliminary budget, is the balancing the old and the everyday with the modern and the futuristic. And maybe you can dwell on us for a minute about how much of a difficulty, a challenge it is for any older system, including yours, to do that kind of juggling act.
Well, if you heard the sell on the capital program that I and others had, it's $1 trillion asset. So $1 trillion needs to be maintained in a state of good repair. When I was here, when I was first here, and Dick Ravitch got the first $8 billion, it was all about state of good repair, state of good repair, state of good repair. And then Peter Stengel said, no, you got to go beyond that. You got to do something about enhancing the quality and the level of service. And then after that, it was the expansion. So you have to do all three. As the population increases and ridership increases, we've got to add capacity to the system. So that's 7 West, that's 2nd Avenue, that's communication-based train control, things of that nature, and also increase the quality and level of service through enhancements. So it's a challenge. We are focused, though, primarily on what we can do through enterprise whole life asset management at squeezing the most useful life out of the assets and not replacing it too soon, because that frees up dollars for the enhancements and for the expansion. It's something that is instilled in the organization. It's part of the process. I think when the chief financial officer goes through a financial plan, he gives you a top-level view of what's going on. But all of those things are embodied in that decision-making process with respect to formulation of a capital plan, getting its approval, and the annual budgets to improve the level of quality of service and maintain state of good repair.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about what Bob Ferran said about projections for fare and toll revenue that you pull in. It's short about $180 million from the February plan. So I wanted to ask, what do you think about the level of service that people are getting? Why didn't the MTA meet that projection from February? And does the MTA think that riders are giving up on the subway and bus system?
The change in the projection was a re-estimation as to what we thought the revenue increase was going to be. We were seeing record ridership increases. For the past 3 years, we were under 6 million quite a few days, but then we started to cross that threshold, 6 million people a day on the subway. And the numbers indicate maybe that rate of rise is trimming somewhat, coming back somewhat. So that's the difference in the revenue that is projected. Whether that's due to people doing other things or the economy, we don't know. We need to spend more time on it. But certainly the issue of either trying to spread the peak or add additional capacity is a challenge that we've got to meet and try to meet faster.
Bob Ferran talked a bit today about the fare increase coming in 2017, and it's something that has been out there for a very long time. You've been doing it out every other year, but inevitably you will still get kicked around by the public on this. Is the 2-year biannual increase something that you're planning to stick to, and is there any chance at any point of stopping that?
First of all, he was very careful in the use of words. It's a projected fare increase as part of a financial plan. It's something you've seen before. It's our way of being able to, in a very transparent way, show what our latest intelligence has in terms of predicted revenue coming forward as well as predicted costs and expenses. So it's a pretty exhaustive financial plan. In my entire career, which is over 40 years, for the overwhelming majority of it, fare increases, they tried to extend them as long as possible, and then when they had it, it was a relatively large one. Across the river in New Jersey, you saw that a few years ago. Coming out of the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, we went to a different place, and that was taking a look at fare and toll increases every 2 years and getting on a more normal schedule. But it's a projected fare increase as part of a financial plan. In November, we'll have an update to this financial plan. We'll see what our needs are, and if we do have needs for a fare increase, the staff will make recommendations for hearings to be held, and then decisions to be made by the board based upon that input. So it's a projected, as it has been for the past 4 years, a projected fare and toll increase as part of a financial plan. That's different than a, yes, we're going to have a fare increase.
Along the lines of the fare increase, you have talked about some special circumstances with tickets that might be reduced here or a different kind of system of applying it. Is that something that's still on the table? And I mean, is there a discussion that eventually we're getting to a point where they'll be too big coming in from Long Island or from other parts of the system?
In answer to the first question, consistent with when we have a discussion on if there's going to be a fare increase, what do we do with what we call the fare tariff? You know, do we have an unlimited ticket? Do we have, you know, a cap on unlimited ticket? Do we have different things that we're having in the fare policy to try to address issues of concern that people have raised. That has always been part of the process. That would be part of the process here. There's always a concern on the part of the board, and the fiduciary responsibilities first and foremost in their mind. You know, at some point you reach a breaking point for fares or tolls as it being too much for people. So that's part of their mindset when they go through the process. But it's at this time, it's a projection. We're not there now.
Or my fingers are too weak. Question on the subway railcar procurement. So the bidders have to submit this U.S. employment sort of plan as part of their bid. How will that factor into the MTA's decision-making process about which companies to award the contract to? How will the quantity and quality of the jobs be weighed against the experience of the contractors and the companies, the history with the different companies that will make that have made these cars in the past for the MTA? How will you weigh X number of jobs in the U.S. versus a foreign manufacturer that is offering rail cars that may be better in quality or cheaper in cost?
We have been negotiated car procurements since I came to the MTA in 1982. A negotiated car procurement is a car procurement where we're not looking for the cheapest car. So we go out with a request for proposals, and there's a number of factors we use in the evaluation with respect to how we select who's the best, okay? Price is one of those. Speed of delivery is another. Quality of the car construction and assessment on our staff's parts that it will meet our safety and reliability needs for the life of the car. As we got later into that, and those have always been part of it, we don't publish the weighting criteria. We don't have to, we don't, but they're all factors that are there. There has been a push and a pressure nationally to start to deal with issues under Buy America, and can we give credit to people who either create jobs or retain jobs? Because there's a benefit to the country at large and to New York State if in the capital dollars we spend, others share in the benefits. So if more New Yorkers can get jobs or retain jobs by the dollars we're spending, that's the idea about the spirit and intent of the Jobs for America. So, and it's also, it's not just creation of jobs, it's retention of jobs. Because New York has the benefit and has had for 25 years of 2/3 car builders. Kawasaki's an established car builder, Bombardier up in Plattsburgh, and Alstom and Hornell. So it's a combination of not only just creation of new jobs, but retention of jobs. That's important for New York, because the tax dollars from New York fund our capital plan, as well as federal dollars.
Going back to the fare payments and the fare increase, you mentioned reaching a tipping point and working on fare policy to kind of address that. When you look at the next MetroCard technology or next fare payment technology coming out, do you see dynamic pricing as maybe a means to kind of address that?
As I answered Greg's question, I tried to say we look at other factors that affect fare policy, and we do in concert with if there was to be a projected fare increase. And that would be part of the dialogue. I'd hate to go further than that, because there's some differences here that don't exist other places, and if you're a native New Yorker, you know that. Single pricing across the entire borough for subways, not time of day or distance based. Most other systems in the country, especially newer ones, are time of day and distance based. And so those are factors that, may or may not change. And it's premature to even talk about it because we're not at that point yet.
Hey, Tom, back here. I have a 5-part question. No, I'm only joking. How heavily do you think the alternate service plans for the L train part shutdown will rely upon buses? And if so, how important will it be to have dedicated bus lanes, or, is the MTA talking with the city about the idea of a 14th Street transitway? How far along are you in thinking about the surface transportation repercussions of that?
That's a very good question. I read all the reports and all the newspaper articles that come out, and in one today, there is a quote from a customer who is also a resident of Williamsburg, and it closes one of the articles. I don't know who gets credit for the article, but it closes one of the articles. And the person walks through the impact that he and his wife are going to have in terms of struggling with this issue for the 18 months and all the pain. But the one thing that he comes back to is, we got to put as many people as possible on the subway because that's where the capacity is. So when we laid out the alternatives, and we were and will continue to be exhaustive in terms of the different things, the primary emphasis is what can we do to divert people to other lines that either have capacity or we can add capacity to, maybe a different route than they would normally take, a little bit less direct, but even so it will get them there faster and more reliably. So that's the first. The second item is what can we do with buses to get them to the subway where the capacity is. And the third is, standalone bus services in that priority order. We have been clear throughout in the discussions with the electeds and primarily the community boards, because that's where the rubber hits the road, that this isn't going to be driven by cost, it's going to be driven by effectiveness. How can we minimize and mitigate the impacts on the customers who are going to most likely experience them? So that's the best way I'm going to say it. But there will always be a percentage of customers who the rail option doesn't work for them, getting them to another line doesn't work for them. It's going to be a bus option, or it could be a ferry option, or it could be a bicycle option. And Polly Trottenberg and I, and the organizations we're responsible for, are committed to doing that. And we've been in constant dialogue, and she's been very supportive of engaging in a dialogue along those lines to have that type of informed decision-making made in concert with the community board and the electeds.
Question about the L. De Blasio made some comments that he doesn't think that the project needs to take 18 months the other day. What do you think about his comments? And you just said that you and Trottenberg have been in constant contact, but it seems to indicate that there's some level of communication that's not happening between the MTA and the city. How do you think you guys can better manage that?
18 months of impact on anybody is longer than they would like. So our focus on, yes, we've landed on the 18-month option full closure, but we're going to do everything we can to incentivize contractors in this process to get it done faster, in balance with also penalties if they're longer than 18 months. And we've found we've been fairly successful when we bring people to the table who know a lot about our system and do work here, that they think of a better way to do this, manners and methods and means, etc. But there's going to be incentivized means, methods, and pressure to do it faster than 18 months. We want to minimize this impact.